Welcome into Raptors today. Akil Augustine joined by Sherman Hamilton and Paul Jones. 104-98 the final score as the Toronto Raptors take out the Chicago Bulls in a game that was extremely significant. If you look at the standings, the Toronto Raptors put 2.5 between themselves and the 12th, or actually 11th place team just outside the play-in tournament now. And they lock up, of course, as Jonesy was mentioning before we got on air. That season series is now 2-1. But let's talk about the game specifically. Big takeaways for you guys, starting with you, Jonesy.
It brought me back to a different era.
Okay, which one?
Well, the late 80s, early 90s.
It was ugly.
It was grinding. 104-98. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't 176 to 175 in double overtime with everybody and their mother coming out of the basket to the stands to score a basket.
No one dropped 70.
No one dropped 70. This was one of those games where you had to execute, and down the stretch, when you got a bucket, it was like a goal in soccer, a goal in hockey. It was so important to execute and get that score. And then you go back to the other end, and there was a point in the game that really stood out for me. The Raptors scored, and Chicago was walking the ball forward, and Fred turned his back to the Bulls walking the ball towards him and looked at his team and clapped his hands and said, "Come on!" Now, it's kind of like, Sherman, we've been there in practice. When you're playing a game and it's competitive, and you don't get the point or you don't win the game till you get a stop.
Yeah,
and that's what it said to me, and it brought me back to that past era. I thought the Raptors' defense was really good when it had to be in the fourth quarter. I thought Scottie was good. His anticipation off the ball, the shot blocking. But it took me back to a different era where it wasn't just your turn, my turn, you score, I score. The defense really kicked in, and I thought it made it tough.
In this era of basketball in the NBA where offense is everything right now, we're seeing ridiculously high volume and scoring individually and team-wise. It's fun to watch.
It is.
But at the end of the day, you got to get stops. And especially on those nights where your offense isn't clicking, you have to get those stops. It becomes more imperative to get those stops. And what we're seeing with the Raptors in that game against the Bulls was offensively, they weren't flowing the way they can flow. They weren't knocking down shots the way we're used to seeing them do that. They didn't have those individual performances that were off the charts. But what they did collectively was play defense.
Yeah.
And they did it when it mattered the most in the fourth quarter. So I just think it's always a nice, friendly reminder. Offense is great. We love to see offense. But if they can't score and you can't score, you have a chance. And your defense will keep you in games and give you a chance to win games if you're not scoring. And the Raptors, I think, showed that against the Bulls.
I'm a bit of a purist in that sense. I know people would look at a game, 98-92, and go, "Oh God, it was terrible." I'm good with that. I'm good with a 98-92 game where you have to execute to score, or last night 104-98, and then at the other end you play defense. I like Sherm said, it's fun to watch 134, 132. That is fun. It's like, back and forth, but windshield wipers. But I'm okay with the 102, and maybe the NBA isn't, because
no, definitely not.
Defense has been devalued now. Let's face it; it's been devalued. But last night was a night that it reminded me of something that I used to watch. And as a basketball, I consider myself a bit of a purist at times. I'm okay with that.
Now, Sherm touched on the exorbitant numbers we've seen from players in recent. Well, if you look at the big names of the Toronto Raptors, 20 points from Pascal Siakam. But the player of the game coming down the stretch was a guy who only had 3 points going into the final stretch of the fourth quarter, and that was Scottie Barnes, 11 points. Talk about his presence and his ability to turn it on in that final frame.
Well, to me, it just showed that level of maturity for a young player in Scottie. Like you said, offensively, it wasn't his type of game in terms of what we know he can do. But to be able to stay in the game mentally, to be able to stay engaged defensively, and to make the plays that he made late in the game, that shows that the young man knows that his value, his impact, and his ability to determine an outcome is bigger than the right-hand column of the score sheet. It's not just about points. And when you see that stat line, you're like, 4 blocks, that's pretty good. But when you watch the game and watch the effort he had and the timing of it and the significance of those plays, I mean, it was phenomenal. But I just thought it spoke to the maturity of Scottie to be able to stay engaged in that process, Because a lot of young players, you find, if the offense isn't rolling, they can wander a bit. They can kind of get disengaged. He stayed locked in and was huge down the stretch.
Yeah, I agree with Sherm in that it's easy to look at the stat sheet and try to play the game off the stat sheet. And a lot of the numbers now have you play games on paper and look at stuff on paper. Can't measure impact. Like some of those things, the impact, the timing of the blocks when Scottie got them. That play there, taking the ball to the goal. Yeah, it's old school. The shot's not going. I'm not going to settle for a jump shot. I'm getting to the basket, handling the ball there, finding Pascal Siakam. And like I said, his defense, and to Sherm's point about not letting his offense dictate how the rest of the game should be played for him. How, does he lose focus? Does he kind of think about, I got to score, and just direct all his energy toward the offensive end? He didn't do that. He was brilliant in the fourth quarter defensively, and other guys were on the ball, enabling him to come from off the ball. He doesn't get some of those blocks if guys aren't engaged with the primary defender. So he got his stuff, but I think the team was pretty good also.
This is what happens, I feel, when you're in an environment of accountability.
Yeah.
This organization, this coaching staff, holds Scottie accountable. So when he goes through those growing pains that look so difficult for the young man, this is the other side of it. You don't let up. You don't relent. You make sure he stays accountable through every process of the season. And then you have moments like these that show that making him responsible and accountable results in game-winning plays on that side of the ball.
All right, it's time to talk second unit now. For that, we turn to our second unit, and that is Savannah Hamilton.
Thanks, Akil. Now, this win was definitely a win by committee when it comes to the bench. Now, you see Gary Trent Jr., he came off, and he was just very effective right from the get-go. He hit a three late in the first quarter, and then it just carried on throughout the game. Of course, at the end of the game, let's jump right to the good part, right? He knocked down those free throws that ended up extending the league and putting it out of reach for the Bulls. So you got to give Gary a lot of credit for being that spark off the bench. He has that humble personality where he could start, 10, 15 games in a row and then also come off the bench on another game and just add that offensive contribution that really adds that depth in total for the Raptors as well. And then you see Chris Boucher. He had a lot of timely threes. He was 3 for 5 from long distance, but when he did connect, it was right on time, on target, and just in rhythm. So he was looking really great on the offensive side of things. And then Thaddeus Young, you gotta give him a lot of credit for how he held down the paint on the defensive end as well as on offense, just being that presence and that other option. You look at the stat sheet, doesn't show up that he had a whole lot of points, but his presence in the paint on defense really made an impact. Of course, you talk about Jakob, he's also in that category there, but it's great to have a bench presence, a guy that could do that, the same thing as well there. And then, of course, Precious, he added that extra spark. Wasn't quite his night, but you know what to expect. He's going to play through it and then get some good looks in the future. So you got to give the bench a lot of credit for what they've been doing this season, and hopefully they keep it up, especially in this long road trip. Akil?
Thank you, Sam. Now, gentlemen, we finally got to see the Raptors, the full complement of players post-trade deadline, which means, of course, Jakob Poeltl, Fred VanVleet healthy, and that bumps Gary Trent to the bench. Let's talk about how this transforms the bench. And also, we saw Thad Young back in the mix. Jonesy, I'll start with you and how this rotation kind of shapes up for this Raptors team as they move forward.
It gives Nick Nurse more options and different people to bring off to the bench to play a different way. I mean, Thad Young on the screen there, we see Gary Trent Jr., Thad Young, Chris Boucher. Precious Achiuwa didn't have a great night last night, but he's a guy that you can't forget. And then I like the addition of Will Barton. I do. A guy who can score, shoot it from the outside, slashing.
We'll touch on him next.
Yeah, but I like the fact that the bench now has more options for Nick. And Thad Young's a guy, he sits there for, 3, 4, 5 games.
Yep. On ice.
He's a veteran. You walk down the bench and you say, all right, man, your turn. And he gets in there and he gives you a positive contribution. So I like the fact that Nick Nurse can go many ways with his bench. The hybrid units, when there's Pascal and Fred or Scottie and Pascal or a couple starters on the floor, and then you sprinkle in these guys that you need. Do we need energy? Okay, Thad, Chris. Do we need defense? All right, Precious. So Nick Nurse has options now. hopefully everybody stays healthy.
It's great to have depth, but when you can increase the quality of your depth, that to me makes a significant difference. And Gary as a starter is great, but when you put him on the bench, it's quality depth now in your rotation, and that allows you to really do some different things with your lineups. And to me, all of that hinges on when you have Fred back in the lineup, all of a sudden now everything starts to fall in place, and that's so crucial. So now the Raptors, when you look at their bench, there's Boucher, there's Achua, there's Young, there's now Will Barton, Gary Trent. You're looking at 5 guys that bring quality depth to your roster and your lineup. And with Nick Nurse's creativity, he has a lot of options now. The mad scientist can go to work with that kind of situation. So I just think their depth is great, and the ability to play different ways. It's going to be interesting to see how they run it out the rest of the season, as long as they stay healthy, right?
Okay. And one of the last moves you can make before playoffs is, of course, the buyout market, and the Toronto Raptors made their move. Juancho Hernan-Gomez exits Toronto. In comes Will Barton from Washington, a guy who spent 8 years in Denver as a real good contributor.
Yeah.
This year he kind of fell off a bit with his numbers and his ability to stay on the floor. But Sherm, I'll talk to you first about Will Barton and what do you expect him to add, because fans are excited about maybe a potential guy who can bring in some more three-point shooting for a team that desperately needs it.
Yeah, but one number that didn't fall off was his three-point shooting.
Yeah.
And you think about the Raptors and what they've struggled with throughout the course of the season is knocking down threes consistently. So that fits in well. His experience fits in well. I mean, he played for Denver, a team that had a lot of growth during his time there, and he was a vital part of it, so he knows how to play in big games. And I think, coming from Washington that maybe wasn't on the same trajectory as this Raptor team is potentially, that could reinvigorate that fire and get that energy going, knowing that you're playing for something bigger. And I just think that he's a quality depth pickup for this team with his scoring ability, as Jonesy said, his slashing, reading, reacting type of style of play. But he can impact the game on so many levels as well as defensively. He's a vet.
He's one of those guys, when I watch him, reminds me of your classic sixth man, a guy who comes in the game and changes things. He's inserted into the game because you're missing something. And whatever it is you feel you're missing, it's like his role morphs to that, and he gives it to you. Whether it's the energy, whether it's the scoring, whether it's picking up pressure deep. Like, he seems to have a good read from the bench coming into the game, and I like the potential that he brings coming off the bench. He's a guy who can heat it up in a hurry in the scoring department off the bench. He can get hot and really start cooking the opponent. So listen, if you're the Raptors and you're worried about the blackouts, the droughts, the scoring droughts, and now you can put Will Barton in the game with Gary Trent.
Yeah. More punch.
You got some firepower. Yeah.
All right. Well, time to hear from the players right now, so we hand you off to Player Sound post game.
No, it's definitely good to have everyone back, everyone healthy, everyone feeling good.
When you look at what you guys have to offer with the addition of you guys healthy now, what's your assessment?
I think we're a really talented team. We're a really good team. We can play small. We can play big. We're precious. We have a bunch of different pieces. Will now. We're a really good team, I think.
How much of, when you're guarding DeMar, how much of the work comes before he touches the ball?
Yeah, try to limit his touches, limit his catches, make his catches harder, and then force him into difficult shots. We did a pretty good job today, but usually, he's a great player, so.
I don't think he gave you the pump fake too often, but is that something you're...
Yeah. Everyone knows about that.
How much does the familiarity with him, being around him, help guard him?
Definitely helps, but still in the game, you don't know what they're going to call, and then he makes tough shots all the time. He's a great player. He's really versatile. He can play inside. He can protect the rim. He can guard it, move his feet on the perimeter. He can guard anyone, so he's a great defender.
What do you think of this new starting five?
It'll work tonight.
Yeah.
It'll work tonight. Again, trying out new lineups this late in the season is, it's fun. So just got to continue to work out the kinks on offense. I thought defensively was really good tonight. I thought we were really keyed in and together, tied together. The effort was there. The intensity was there. Created good shots. We got a little stagnant there, a little nasty. But other than that, I thought it was pretty good.
Gary in the second unit, it's pretty nice to have that offense in there.
Yeah, he's a starting caliber player, obviously. You know what I mean? He's a really good player. Is great offensively. He was really active. He looked fresh. He had pop to him tonight. He carried a big stretch there, and Forrest got a couple key buckets. Him and Chris, I mean, to get 19 from Gary and 9 from Chris, you still got that and Precious, and obviously we'll work Will in. So, I like how that's starting to shape out a little bit.
Nick called Scottie's fourth quarter inspirational, like in terms of the defense, the blocks, and all of that. When he's playing like that, how much do you guys feed off of that?
Yeah, special, man. He made a couple plays. Not many guys in this league can make, the blocks, the push, the break, the and one. He was talking. He was keyed in, and that's a big boost. And especially a lineup out there without me and Pascal, for him to carry that in the fourth and get us some separation there that really won us the game ultimately was his defense and his playmaking and just putting pressure on the rim. So we need him to keep making those strides. We know how special of a player he can be, and he shows us that, at times.
Gone up against Will over the years. What do you think of the addition? How much do you think he's going to help down the stretch?
Yeah, I like it. I think, the many as those guys we can get, you know what I mean? He's just a good player. He's a bucket getter. He's a hooper. He's got some playoff experience. He's battle-tested. He's done it at a high level. He's played on really good teams. So I think, whether it's locker room or just experience to help with some of the other guys or just another guy that we can, count on any given night. He can get you 20 to 30 on any given night. I think that's a luxury to have coming off the bench.
Welcome back inside Raptors today. Now we're talking Canadian basketball, and it's the time of year where they announced the BioSteel All-Canadian for both the boys and the girls side. Thinking of some of the alumni from this game, you got Jamal Murray, Luguentz Dort, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So the game has definitely provided us with some great talent over the years. Jonesy, you're involved with the call for this game. How excited are you for this year's crop?
Yeah, I did the call last year, and I recognized some of the names up there on both sides. The boys' side and the girls' side. Vashon Alette was in that last year. I look at some of the names and some of the talent, and I kind of chuckle because having been around as long as I have, people say, "Well, Canada, like this great frontier of basketball players," and I laugh. And there's a guy sitting to my left that before he went to Virginia Commonwealth was at some tiny little school in Florida, and the guy who found him as the coach was also the guy that coached Karl Malone. Like, you could always get a player in Canada. You just had to come up and look for him or her and had to come up and maybe do a little digging. But
there wasn't infrastructure like this.
No, but this idea that, Canada's suddenly it's coming to the forefront and getting the notoriety, but the kids were always here. People were always here. You could always come to Canada and find a player, and usually with less competition than trying to out-recruit them from somebody else. So, I look at the BioSteel game, and it's a showcase for young Canadian basketball talent. It really is. And to me, it's getting up there on the level with things like the Nike Hoop Summit, the McDonald's All-American
ABC.
Nike, ABC, Adidas. Like, it's right on that level. But because it's in Canada, people never paid attention before, and now it's like, hey, remember, next to the USA, there's more Canadians on NBA rosters than any other country in the world.
We've always had talent, to Jonesy's point. We've always had talent. Now we have platforms for proper global exposure. That's the difference. And the fact is, the talent's getting better. And it's getting younger. It's more consistent. There's more investment. This is a whole process that's happening. So I'm not surprised that we've had this platform, and even working Global Jam last summer, you just see these young men and women who they're going to be there. It's no question they're going to be there because of all the opportunities. So I think the BioSteel game has been great. It's been done well. It's grown, and the fact is, we are getting real production out of these games, and that to me is the most important thing.
Shout out to the main sponsor, BioSteel, who's been a big supporter of the game here, and of course the Canadian national team. And off to our head coach, who's also the head coach of our national team. It's time to hear from Nick Nurse.
Again, defensively, we did a lot of good things. Just a few moments again where we got a little, and it seems to be the same things, a few transition threes and a few transition buckets. In bar about 8 to 10 offensive possessions. I liked how we were playing offense. I still think there's some rhythm issues and scoring issues. I thought we moved the ball pretty good. I don't know how many assists we had, but we passed it good. I can't even see that. It says 26. It's pretty good for 38 or 9 field goals. I don't know why I can't see that over here tonight, but so I thought we were making the right plays on offense. It wasn't going in as much as I liked it to, but I thought the plays were pretty much right. Again, there was 6-8 possessions that I would like to have over that we probably didn't execute or shot too quick or something like that without exploring a little bit more. But I thought the ball moved pretty good. So defense solid, offensive execution solid. The offensive scoring wasn't. I think there's some room for growth there. It's good, and I probably that's a good role for him to kind of we kind of let Chris and Precious see what's going on, and the one thing I will say is those two guys, like Chris had a tough time in the first half, bounced back great in the second half. They doing that a little bit. Like even if they don't play that good in the first half, they'll bounce back with some hard play in the second. But Thad was able to kind of plug in there. And he was really, I thought, just strong and assertive and very good at both ends. Yeah, well, I think that that felt like the right way to go starting. I think that we needed OG in there for defense. We pretty much matched him with DeMar all night long. And I just felt like we needed Gary scoring in the game because the scoring wasn't coming that easy. And then defensively, we got to a pretty good scheme there, like the last half of the fourth, where we're putting Scottie on Vucevic and being able to switch the ball screens, and OG would then go on Vucevic. So we went back to kind of our whatever, doesn't matter what we call it, that defensive scheme, and that seemed to be good, and it just seemed like the way to stay. Right, I think the combination of it working out defensively with that scheme and Gary's offensive production was the way to go.
You talked about OG working his way back before the game. This looked more like OG, especially in the defensive end?
Yeah, it was good. We got him started right away. You got a nice little back cut basket to start the game. It's always like a jolt, I think, to somebody. So that was good. And then we had a little bit of a size matchup at times. And we threw the ball in the post to them a couple times, and they were actually, their scheme is to double, and we thought we would live with that. We would throw it in there, let them double, run the cutters, and we'd either get a good cutting basket or probably a wide open three, and we ran a couple of those in a row. I think that got us that, and then he obviously took one too, right to the rim and scored too when they got out of the double. So it was a good place to go, which is nice because we haven't gone that way for quite some time probably.
Next up for Nick Nurse and his Toronto Raptors is a pair of games against the Washington Wizards, and with how tight it is between the 6th and the 11th spot.
Big games.
Are these must-wins, Jonesy?
I don't know if they're must-wins.
Come on.
I don't know if they're must-wins because
ahead.
you still have 18 left or 17 left after them. But like we said, on the show Monday, this week goes a long way to helping crystallize what's ahead. I mean, if the Raptors look, they're half a game behind Atlanta.
Yep.
And it's the loss column. Like that's the thing that I always look at. They're one loss behind Atlanta. They're only 3 losses behind Miami. So I don't know if it's must win, Akil, but as you're playing to get better and trying to peak at the right time of the season, in spite of everything that's gone on before, you can't do anything about that. This is the time to go after it. And huge games. Like I said, I wouldn't say they're must win, but they're very important.
It's kind of twofold. Number one, obviously, you're playing a team that's right on your heels in the standings, so you definitely don't want to give those away and have them leapfrog you. The other side of it is, you're trying to navigate the rest of the season. And in doing so, you've got to make sure that collectively you understand giving up ground at any point is not something that you can do. You have to continue to take ground. And I think for the Raptors, knowing that and knowing how close they are to putting themselves in a very good situation, regardless of what's happened throughout the course of the season, that's got to energize you. That's got to get you hungry and motivate you to go after it. So I just think that, yeah, you don't want to get jumped by that team, but you also don't want to give up ground in terms of where you are and what you can accomplish with a couple of wins. And the other side of it is what's coming after those two games.
Yes.
A rough road trip.
It's a tough road trip that you're going to have to figure out some things, and it'll be tougher to get those wins than trying to get these two against Washington.
Okay, so let's fix our focus now from – okay, you know what? I think we're running out of time, so we're not going to get too much into it, but who's the biggest threat on this Wizards team now? We know Porzingis might not be available, so it comes down to Beal or it comes down to a hot Kuzma.
I go with the consistency of Beal. Because he's a dangerous guy offensively.
Yeah.
But you're right. Kyle Kuzma is a wild card, and he can – the Lakers wish they had him now.
Beal has played.
A lot of guys.
Beal has traditionally played well against the Raptors. I think back to even playoff series when he was a younger player in the game. Something about these Toronto uniforms that heats this guy up. So he'll be one that Toronto really has to hang on to.
All right, two very important games coming up for your Toronto Raptors as they look to wrap up the season. 18 games remain. It will be the Toronto Raptors versus the Washington Wizards. You can catch that on the Sportsnet family of networks. That's Sportsnet 590 for the radio call and Sportsnet on TV. That does it for us here on Raptors Today. We thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.